Welcome to the B Weekend. I'm Ari Melber. Let's get right into the headlines. We begin right now with these vows, pledges, and even sometimes confessions about the extreme agenda of the modern right. And we're not just talking about policy extremism, say on taxes or education, but rather how MAGA forces are openly plotting what independent reports call a revenge administration. Take a listen.
The left's new America will have no written constitution.
Some will say that I am advocating Christian nationalism, and so I do.
Now, this is an approach on display at a national conservatism gathering, which I'm going to get into with you tonight. This matters because voters are not only going to decide whether they truly want 4 more years of Donald Trump, but what more Trump actually means. So this is, I'll tell you up top, a story about Donald Trump's positions. He is one of the people running for president. You know that. It's a story about his allies. And like anything in politics, it exists within these times, this current mood in politics, something Nicole Wallace, our colleague, just alluded to. Now, this mood, let me tell you, could turn out to be overblown. This mood about how things are going or how the Biden campaign is doing may not predict the election. But there is clearly now a perception in D.C. and among political elites that Donald Trump's election is now more likely. Now, as they sometimes say, well, stop right there. We are not reporting Trump's election is more likely as a matter of fact. No one has voted yet. No one can reliably report the future. I've mentioned that to you before on stories of all kinds. But if we're dealing with reality, perceptions or even false predictions can have consequences, especially in matters of human affairs and politics. And what I'm telling you, what I'm mentioning, I bet you're already familiar with. I always try to keep it clear, level with you. You're probably aware of this. There are leaders in both parties who seem to think right now that Trump is more likely to be elected. And that's a perception atmosphere that matters. Or it could matter and still prove not to be true. Biden could still beat Trump as he did once before. But even as the doubts about Biden get attention, there is a flip side that's coming into view. MAGA leaders, as I just showed you, are not only saying they expect to win, but they have this emotion that it may be tipping into a type of overconfidence or political arrogance, and that is part of what I want to get into with you tonight before we bring in our guests. Because having looked around, and my team and I, we've been reporting on this, we see here for you 2 key things that are pretty basic and that matter here. One, this kind of excited confessions about the real Trump agenda. And 2, this possible political arrogance that can feed a type of mistakes. And even Donald Trump himself now seems to be aware of how this could backfire. Again, showing his keen sense of PR, if nothing else. And that's especially the case if more voters switch from just hearing about Democrats debating Biden and whether they want him, which is a dynamic that may help Trump, to hearing about what Donald Trump and this Project 2025 agenda and team might actually do with power. These people, including Steve Bannon, who just reported to prison, but who will one day get out, and who is working with other people to tell you what he wants to do for payback. And that may cause tactical mistakes on the right, even as top figures are speaking in these open terms about their agenda. The evidence here I want to show you is that Donald Trump is backing away from this very Project 2025 plan hatched by his own aides with clear ties to him, his past, and his future. But he's distancing himself from it, at least rhetorically, at least politically. Now, candidates usually tack to the middle for a general election. Conservatives had been arguing Trump was going to try to be responsible. He was not going to be the dictator, they said. He was not going to do the things that they said his opponents would actually do. The National Review, conservative outlet, saying, hey, reality check on Trump as dictator, that kind of prophecy. These are recent pieces, but from before the debate. And I pulled them for you because Trump had been taking a similar approach, basically trying to argue that you can deal with him, that it's not going to be too extreme or crazy if he wins. So, yes, he riles up his base online on the internet. We know about that. He talked a lot of trash during his trial where he was became a convicted felon. But in the big interviews and at the debate, he actually plays down the vengeance. But his own aides, Trump administration veterans, are feeding those headlines. So, again, I showed you this. Let's put that back up just from before. The Trump conservative allies plotting a, quote, revenge administration. That's their words, not criticism. And now this breaking to the open with the giddiness and maybe an abandon, criminal defendants like coup architect John Eastman, like Bannon and Navarro, he's not out of the woods legally, but he's arguing they got to remake the courts with their own partisan impeachment. MAGA allies talking up how they don't want to necessarily be a full-blown mafia, but if they aren't willing to dish it out, then we can just expect to keep taking it. The kind of violent talk that's in this conversation now. Bush-era figures, once deemed quite extreme, are now admitting they have plans to, if they win in 2025, retaliate against their foes in exactly the same way they say they believe they were retaliated against. If we're not going to become a banana republic, unfortunately, John Yoo admits we're going to have to, quote, use banana republic means. Banana republic means. He admits it. He says it. Here's more from him.
Now they're so worried because once they've destroyed all these norms and the way they've gone after Trump, they realize Republicans can turn around and do the exact same things to them. I don't want this norm to have been broken. I wish we were not using the criminal justice system to interfere in politics. But how else could you deter Democratic DAs from doing the same thing?
So don't do what Jesus would do. Don't love thy enemy. Play the long game.
Unfortunately, Jesus wasn't running for president.
A little bit of Jesus talk there. You'll notice that's a type of pushback coming even from Fox, saying, well, wait a minute, though. I think he was quoting Jesus positively and saying sometimes you have to love your enemy, turn the other cheek, that kind of stuff. John Yoo saying no. So that shows that Fox may be aware, at least that host, that you don't win over voters like this. And the arrogance is being noticed already. Miami Herald, in a key state, with this headline, quote, cocky Trump struts at Doral political rally. It doesn't matter who they nominate. So this is the mood I mentioned for a project that even Trump is walking away from, telling people Project 2025, the agenda by his aides, maybe that's not what he's really going to do. He certainly doesn't want that taking up headlines over Democrats debating Biden. And Project 2025, which you've probably heard about and we've been covering it, goes well beyond just a random wish list. It is an effort to launder and normalize plans by the people who really want to do all this, and that may be why they're willing to use their extreme rhetoric that goes beyond what Trump wants right now. I showed you the headlines. Trump distancing, Trump saying maybe that's not him, at least when he thinks swing voters are listening. But here is what some of these folks, directly or indirectly tied to these conservative groups and this project, are saying at that National Conservatism Convention in Washington.
And I'm sure some will say now that I am calling America a Christian nation. And so I am.
The progress flag says to me, it says to me one monstrous thing, that I was a member of a government that presided over the mutilation of our children.
The left's new America will have no written constitution.
Some will say that I am advocating Christian nationalism, and so I do.
Public health agencies declare the coronavirus can't be spread at Black Lives Matter protests.
Let's make the Ten Commandments our symbol.
They're running the country by secret, unelected oligarchy.
Put it up, not just in the schools, just put it up everywhere.
They have donors, staff interests, and secret Democrat Party shadow bosses running the country.
That last speaker served all 4 years in Donald Trump's White House. You may recall many people came and went. Mr. Miller did not. So this is the team. And while, let's be clear and fair, even in these tense times, candidates, of course, speak for themselves and they can distance themselves or try to separate themselves from what some aides or ex-officials say. But that's going to be hard for Trump to do if the attention continues to look at the facts and the evidence, as the giddy wing of MAGA doesn't seem to worry about what their actual candidate wants to do, which is tamp down extreme talk. Again, he knows PR if nothing else. Now, another former Trump official, Tom Homan, is vowing the biggest deportation force America's ever seen, adding in some swearing to make the point. Wait till 2025. Again, 2025 is their rallying call. 2025. This is when they will deliver, they say. Now, again, if you follow the evidence, some of the MAGA talk even outstrips the actual record. People can debate how to do immigration. I've told you before, most presidents in both parties in the last 20 years have struggled with the issue for a lot of complex reasons. And with Biden and Trump, there's not as big a gap as some of the MAGA folks are selling, Biden has actually outpaced Donald Trump's deportation record, returning over 500,000 people to Mexico and other similar situated countries with migration issues, which exceeded Trump's totals by a lot, as a Washington Post account explained. So that's worth noting, because people can debate how much deportation to do and whether that's good or bad, but some of what you're hearing is them overselling it. Meanwhile, Donald Trump says, hey, 2025, those guys, maybe I met some of them one time, but that's not my thing, because he has an understanding that this type of extremism and political arrogance will not help him win the election, which some of them now think he's more likely to do. As for the Democrats, they are not just standing by. Vice President Harris, who has been playing a special role lately as people really look at this ticket, seizing on the MAGA manifesto as a warning for voters.
Donald Trump has openly vowed, if reelected, he'll be a dictator on day one. Round up peaceful protesters, terminate the United States Constitution. Trump advisors have created a 900-page blueprint of their agenda for the second term. They call it Project 2025. It includes a plan to cut Social Security. This represents an outright attack on our children, our families, and our future.
Powerful, important warning. Vice President Harris also following one of the James Carville maxims. Don't just tell them what they already know, tell them something new and true that matters. And he knows his way around campaigns. And Democrats have still argued they want to be truthful, while Donald Trump has been caught lying more than any politician alive. That's Washington Post. That's just a fact. Sounds negative, but if it's truth versus lies, well, there's evidence that the Carville maxim that Vice President Harris is pushing is working. I mentioned Donald Trump backing off his own team's work. That's a tell. He doesn't want more exposure on this, doesn't want you to see these headlines or this kind of reporting on air. Second, tell them something new and true. By clear metrics of public interest that we use today, going well beyond random polls, more people are looking into this controversial project than even the woman you see on your screen, who is of documented fascination, not only to Swifties, but to so many people around the world. Shout out to Taylor. I don't mean to bring her too deep into politics, but I'm going to show you something quite relevant. If you compare the interest and the searches and the online traffic queries to Taylor Swift or the NFL, here's a chart showing the main search engine people use, Google searches over just the last month. You will see Taylor and the NFL clicking along with plenty of interest. The blue line is this very recent surge. I'm not talking about just news watchers or political junkies or even just, say, Trump foes. You don't get past those Taylor and NFL levels without a heck of a lot of people searching Project 2025. And again, that's just search data. Some of those people might support it. Some of those people might be Trump supporters. But as Trump walks away from it, a heck of a lot more of them are people who are now reading up about something that Donald Trump himself wants to disown. People are looking into this. And that brings us to a final point here before I bring in our esteemed guest tonight. There are choices in elections. The debate may or may not be a low point for Joe Biden that he rebounds from and wins again, or something that crystallizes questions about his candidacy. Discussing that is part of dealing in the factual universe, not pretending that something was good or bad or indifferent to it because you're worried that it will affect your side or the other side. We deal in facts here. But let's be clear politically, a referendum on Biden's competence is one way to look at the election, and it raises questions. A referendum on what Trump would actually do with his power, which apparently he doesn't want you and other people to do, to be searching 2025 and looking at their actual plans, well, that could lead potentially to a very different outcome in November. We're going to tackle those questions, that referendum, when we're back with our experts.
The left's new America will have no written constitution and no rule of law, no independent judiciary, no democratic accountability or national sovereignty. It will be a global theocracy with Marxist fundamentalists sitting in its thrones, manning its bureaucracies, and menacing its enemies.
That's the warnings out of MAGAland. We're joined by attorney and civil rights leader Maya Wiley and New York Times reporter Robert Draper, who's been covering some of this in his Republican platform that could read like a Trump rally. Peace. Welcome to both of you. Robert, I laid out both the realities here, but why some people think there's actually rhetorical or PR daylight between Trump and some of these extreme agendas. Your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are principally that, as you've laid out, Ari, I mean, it's intellectually unreasonable to suggest that there's a whole lot of distance between the two. After all, the Heritage Foundation played a critical role in 2017 in staffing up the first Trump administration, and you pointed out all of the staff connections between Heritage, Trump, and Project 2025. It's politically totally reasonable. You know, that Trump wants to give himself plenty of wiggle room. We've seen this also with the platform, which got by with the absolute minimum. He doesn't want to play his hand. Oh, I should also say that, you know, Trump wants credit for everything that happened. So when he's distanced himself from the Heritage Foundation and from Project 2025, in part that's because he doesn't want anyone else to actually act like they are the shadow policymakers. It's all about Trump. But we saw this before with the Federalist Society and their role in the Supreme Court picks. The president wanted all credit for those. Ultimately, he gets the credit, but it wasn't his idea.
Maya?
Yes, absolutely. Look, Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation, which produced Project 2025, himself said that essentially conservatism now is Trumpism. He created a direct and explicit line to Donald Trump and really reinforced even what some others who are conservative Republicans have said, which is this is no longer the party of Lincoln. This is the party of Trump. It has become a cult of personality as much as something that's platform, that's very tenets are literally taken from the mouth of Donald Trump and all of those who have served him. And it's pretty obvious, and I just want to underscore this important point about the Federalist Society. Donald Trump ran on a platform that said he was going to overturn Roe v. Wade. He ran on that platform. He installed those justices because the Federalist Society told him these are the people who will deliver overturning Roe versus Wade. That's what he did. That's what he got. A lot of these are the same folks. It's the same playbook. And even now, to your point about the tell, Ari, we're seeing them changing the language in the Republican platform, not to say that they want to create a national abortion ban, but to say they want to enforce personhood under the 14th Amendment. You know what that is?
Yeah.
It's code for a national abortion ban, but it's their way of trying to communicate to white Christian nationalist extremists that they will deliver while they're trying to pretend to the rest of us that they're reasonable. It's not going to fly.
Because of the combined coverage last night, we got this number late in the day. The ratings tend to come out later in the day. Over 20 million Americans actually watched that speech last night. So it's up with the State of the Union and or the Super Bowl, much larger as that kind of level event. It was on all the networks. It was not a perfect press conference, but a lot of people felt it was a pretty good one. Your thoughts?
No, I thought it was a very good one. I mean, particularly given that everyone had, was placing the bar so low, you would think the man wouldn't be able to get out of bed to actually do the press conference, given the narratives. But no, the president is in this fight. I'm reminded, Ari, of a conversation I had when I was leaving New York last weekend. I was in the Moynihan train station waiting for the train, and an elderly Irishman came up to me and said hello. We were chatting a little bit, and before he went to take his train, he turned back and he looked at me and he said, "Joe Biden's not quitting this race." And I said, "Why do you say that?" He said, "Because he remembers and is right now that 11-year-old kid who was bullied on the playground because of his stutter. And so he is in the fight. And when he's up against the bully and he sees both Donald Trump and, quite honestly, members of his own party right now as bullies who are trying to bully him out of this race, in the case of Donald Trump, trying to bully the country into an authoritarian regime, and he wants to stand in that fight. And so when you look at that 81-year-old man, now 41, and you see in him that fight, you got to have mad respect for that. I mean, I get what a lot of people are saying, but he's basically drawing the line and saying, If you want me out, come take me out. And so I hope the Democrats understand what they're about to get into. Maybe they'll have a rush of people who come out, Ari, and scream at the president to get out of the race. Maybe there will be private conversations with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi who encourage him to get out of the race, who tell him he can't win. But it seems to me the more you tell him he can't win, the more he knows he can. And what's interesting is the polling is showing his own base is consolidating around that idea that, yeah, he's old. We get it. We got it. He stumbles. He's always stumbled. He's been stumbling for 50 years. How many, gaffe reels do we have of Joe Biden? But I think this
look, I don't want to
is an important one.
Yeah, I don't want to overcompliment you, but your clarity is reminding us why we come to you, even in these big, politically tense, emotional stories. Because while there are, I think, understandable concerns on both sides, and I've covered both sides of this story, and the questions raised about the fitness of both these candidates, both these elderly men, by the way I've said it for months is they're both above the retirement age. So we know they're both older, and you could debate how they both came into office, but they've both done the job in very different ways. They both are the presumptive nominees. That's the wording we use when the primaries are over, but the convention hasn't occurred. And generally, it's very unlikely that presumptive nominees don't become the nominees. So I've discussed that evidence with the viewers. The other thing that you're alluding to, whether you want to use an anecdote on the train station or the polling or the other indications we're getting, Michael, the narrators, and we are in our own ways, some of the narrators, but some of the D.C. narrators have been more emotional, more angry, more at times panicked than the audience, than the citizenry.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, this will be up to the citizenry. So I say that by way of introduction before I get your response to all that, to D.L. Hughley, who's been on this program. He's a smart comic. He works with live audiences all the time. So like you and other people in politics, he actually has that feel. And I want to play some of what he said in his own, his own style, getting Biden's back and getting Biden. Yeah, in his DL way, getting Biden's back and also speaking to what you just referred to as that bullying or that pushback. Take a listen.
I watched a man get convicted of 34 felonies. I watched a man get adjudicated for sexual battery. I watched a man who got convicted of fraud. And never have I heard this fervor from the media in general about his qualifications to be president. And if you're going to have a conversation about how old he is, have a conversation about how old they want to take this country back to. And to have these conversations about George Clooney, yeah, he's not the man he was in Ocean's 11. Name me a time when somebody gave up the incumbency and won. If you can vote for a convicted felon, I can vote for a cadaver.
That's how he put it. Your thoughts?
I love DL. I mean, that's the one thing I've always admired about. He keeps it real. And, he and I butted heads and stuff and policy and things like that. But he's always engaged in the conversation because he's as a comic, certainly, but as someone who is also an activist, he has his finger on a lot of pulses out there. And I think it's very true what he says. We've watched the story, the saga, the drama, the serial nature of Donald Trump unfold in front of our eyes. And you have not heard the media go to the same depth of DEFCON 7, and particularly given that there are only 5 levels in DEFCON. So that tells you something around Joe Biden and his aide. It has stunned me. And I've had to deal with a lot of this crazy when I was at the RNC, and you say the least little thing and people lose their mind. But this has been absolutely apoplectic, over the top crazy. And the hand wringing and the pearl clutching and the big alligator tears. And here, this is the best part for me, Ali. The people, Ari, the people who say, oh, hey, you're a good guy. You were a great president. We love your service to the country. This sort of soft, killing me softly kind of approach. I think DL's got his finger on that. And a lot of voters out there don't appreciate it. 14 million people, Ari, voted for Joe Biden. And now you have the hue and cry of the media, the New York Times, and the Washington elites, party elected officials, who are screaming, we don't like your choice. Well, you go have that conversation with the 14 million people who voted for him and put somebody up and see what they do if that's not their choice. So this is the conundrum the Democrats have put themselves in. They need to get a grip. They need to get behind the 81-year-old guy. And if they need to wheel his ass over the finish line, that's what you do.
The true deadline here for the Democrats is almost certainly August 7th. That's the current scheduled date for the roll call vote that would occur prior to the convention and long before this debate issue. What you see there on August 7th, the Dem delegate roll call vote, was partly a response to efforts in Ohio by Republicans to play around. I'm going to summarize that and keep it brief, but to play around with deadlines and whether or not the Democratic nominee would be official by then. And so the Democratic lawyers said, OK, we'll just hold it early and we'll skip any debate. September, of course, you have the second scheduled debate if they both do it. There's no law that forces them, but that was the agreement. And early voting in September, you see, and then early voting in key swing states begins in early October. Michael, how does that calendar line up against what Joe Biden's doing right now, which is doing a campaign rally in Michigan, one of those three key blue wall states, as they call it, that he would need to win and would need the early voting and everything else to come into perspective for him? And how does that compare to what you were just discussing, which was a sort of a Washington or elite conversation about trying to maybe make a change with what are basically about, if you use August 7th, about 25 days left?
Right. Yeah, look, the Democrats, and I want to be very clear, because rank and file baseline Democrats are consolidating around the president. There's more than 3 or 4 polling, examples out there now for that. So that's an important piece of the narrative here. You cannot dismiss it. Even where you have in our own polling at NBC News and others that show 67 to 75% of those asked, should Joe Biden run again, say no. But when the next question is, who would you vote for between Joe Biden and Donald Trump? The answer comes back 45-45 or 46-45. So the reality of it is there's a consolidation that's happening right now in the political marketplace among rank and file Democrats across the nation who are looking at Joe Biden saying, oh, yeah, everybody's just figured out he's old. Yeah, he's old, but I like him. He's better than the criminal. He's better than the guy who's got 34 felonies hanging over his head, right? So you have that. Then you've got the clock/calendar, which is what they're up against in Washington. Because if you want Joe Biden out, you better get him out in 3, 2, 1. Because you don't have a runway here. You don't have a runway otherwise. Because Joe Biden is sitting on $100 million in cash. And unless Kamala Harris steps into that joint, nobody's getting that. And they'll have to start all over. So that takes out Whitmer, that takes out Newsom, that takes out anybody they want to put up, because they won't have the cash in their bank to run the rest of the race. They just won't. I don't care. I don't know how many Democratic billionaires out there, but if they're not stroking huge checks, it ain't happening. You also have the problem of that base I was just talking about. So if you're going to do a swap out, when are you going to do it? You're going to do it going into the convention, in which case you've got an open convention. And Lord knows how that turns out. A lot of angry delegates, 30-some hundred of whom are Joe Biden delegates. You think they're just going to lay down after the fight they've been through to get there? Okay, keep dreaming. But then if you say, okay, Joe, come on, we'll nominate you, and then you get out of the race, okay, that even sounds stupid. All right. So then how do you play that narrative if on the back end? Then the party's got to decide. According to Democratic Party rules, the chairman, the minority leader in the House, the Senate majority leader, party, and others officials will get together and make that choice. And how do you think that plays out?
So although I wish I were here with better news, the fact is that you and I are sitting here today because this will be your last week of employment at this company.
George Clooney in a memorable role in Up in the Air, where he had the job of telling people their work was over. They were fired. We are joined again by Molly Jong-Fast and Michael Steele. Molly, George Clooney tried to reprise that role in the real world and use his role as a very rich person. He's worth hundreds of millions of dollars, reportedly, and a big fundraising supporter of the president and a celebrity, to step into what Michael Steele earlier criticized as a kind of panicky rush without looking through all of the facts and without also weighing the faults of the other candidate. Molly, what do you think about that aspect, that some of the people in Joe Biden's orbit, and Clooney was careful to say he likes him and thinks he's a good president, and some of the other Democrats pushed all of this out very quickly, a kind of a snap plan to replace the president and the current nominee. He's the nominee until he decides he's not. That's how it works. And then there seems to be possibly, after 2 weeks in the polling, there seems to be a movement away from that.
So I wrote right after it happened for Vanity Fair that I thought everyone should slow down, that I thought making a decision this monumental in 2 days was insane. And I got pushback for that. And honestly, I hate to say this, but I was actually right. No, look, we had this week of like bonkers financial news, right? Inflation is lowering. The Fed is going to cut rates now. They think in September. I mean, just like one piece of good financial news after another. The market is doing great. These are the things that Joe Biden will be running on, right? Bringing chips manufacturing back to the Midwest. You know, the guy has a stutter. He's always not been a gifted orator. Like, this is, 2000 Joe Biden made gaffes too. He called himself a gaffe machine. So the idea that now he must be disqualified because he makes gaffes, anyone who saw that debate, and look, I'm not telling people what to do because this is a very hard question, right? It's really, none of us have enough information to make an informed decision. And because of the high stakes nature of this election, it is really, this is the sort of one of the hardest questions I think that we've faced in this business. But I'm telling you, he can run on this really good economy because he's been president for 4 years. And, while the vice president can certainly do that, no other candidate can. And a lot of these Joe Biden should drop out op-eds felt to me like a little bit of wish casting, like we need just the West Wing to come in there and write us a president. And that's not how any of this works.
As we end the hour and the Beats installment here on Friday, I go to Jackson Brown. Doctor, my eyes have seen the fears and the slow parade of tears. 2 weeks of tears among some in D.C. What do you say to those who've wiped away their tears and need to get back to work, as you put it earlier?
Look, I'm not like you, and I'm sure others. I'm not trying to tell people how to vote. You have your own thoughts about this, but all I'm asking people to do is recognize the fight that's still in the man, and recognize his ability to galvanize and bring us together around a very simple idea. America is worth fighting for. America is worth saving. America is all of us. And there's a presidential candidate in our midst who wants to divide us, who wants to ship some of us away, who wants to put some of us in concentration camps, who wants to use the power of our institutions against the American people. And you have to decide for yourself whether or not you're ready to buckle up enough to get behind the 81-year-old guy who's like, I'm ready to do this fight. Let's just push him. Let's keep pushing him. Let's keep pushing him. And if he looks weak, pick him up and push him some more. Because you're not pushing Joe Biden, you're pushing the country. You're pushing who we are as citizens. That's what this is about for me. And I hope it's important to enough Americans when they walk into, not in July, I give you the summer, go do you, boo, work on that tan, right? But when it's time for you to saddle up and buckle up, come Labor Day, come October, do the work.
When we come back, I have my first reported comments on what to make of this controversial and extreme Supreme Court term and the news coming out of the House, AOC pushing to impeach 2 justices. Next. The Supreme Court has just finished one of the most extreme and controversial terms of the modern era. And we can report on the evidence for that. The justice's own conduct drove far more headlines than any time in the past several decades for scandals, from grifting their secret benefits and gifts to Justice Alito's home violating the U.S. flag code in solidarity with convicts who stormed the Capitol. The court's rulings also reveal a blatantly partisan edge. I don't mean conservative ideology, I mean pro-Republican, finger on the scale partisanship. Chief Justice Roberts leading a very MAGA court. It makes up rules. It makes up law on the fly. That's something conservatives had claimed to oppose and sometimes accuse others of. But now you have the unprecedented ruling that helps Trump avoid a coup trial by inventing a new immunity that no other person or president has ever had in American history. By definition, that's new law, not old precedent. Roberts also failing to lead the court into any traditional deference or unity. Let's be clear. Other courts, even in tough times with many clashes, have been less partisan. They have found ways to bring justices together in a compromise or sometimes humble agreements. This term actually saw the highest rate of justices going it alone. That's through what they call concurring opinions rather than finding a broader agreement or consistent legal reasoning. And that means that's happening even when the conservatives agree on their rulings, on what they think the holding should be. Here's how the New York Times put it in one count. These justices in this past term could not find consensus on the rationale, even in agreement. They issued what I just told you about, the concurring opinions at a record rate, the highest since at least 1937, which is how they've often counted it, and probably the highest ever. That is a setback for Roberts. It shows a type of failure and a type of partisanship. It's also, of course, a failure for the justices he leads in the majority, primarily these Republican appointees. Critics say it's a sign that this court does not even pretend to be interpreting one constitution with one lens, because its members are literally making up their own different and competing rationales, and these Republican appointees don't seem to care that the public will see this breakdown, that they can't actually say 5 of them issued a ruling for the same reasoning. Now, if these are real problems, are there real solutions? Well, the court is deliberately insulated, more so than the political branches. No elections, no term limits, no mandatory retirement. Judges are also not typically ever facing the threat of removal for how they rule, for their rulings. They can be impeached for misconduct, and tonight there's rare news on that front. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has now issued new articles of impeachment against both Justices Thomas and Alito, citing high crimes in their now exposed practice of taking these huge gifts and then hiding it and failing to disclose and then refusing to recuse, even when, according to the Congresswoman, they had clear legal conflicts. It's a major step. It's the first time anything like this has actually been attempted in over a century. If there is precedent here, it would actually go back to Justice Fortas, who resigned after the exposure of a financial scandal that was smaller than what Clarence Thomas faces today. The justice pocketed about $20,000 in 1969 dollars, and what he took was investigated by the DOJ at the time. When that news broke, well, we checked the archives. The Washington Post reported the justice thus ended what was, quote, 11 days of anguish, personal and for the Supreme Court, that began with this charge that he took, quote, a $20,000 fee from a convicted stock manipulator's family foundation. The Post noting the resignation, first by a justice under fire in U.S. history, was effective Wednesday. Now, that was a different time, and clearly a different standard that justice held himself to compared to today, because after an error was exposed, it was dealt with. Today's justices are unabashed, shameless, as they say, in their grifting, even as they have rulings that make up new law, from ending abortion rights to the decision boosting Trump with a new made-up immunity for these so-called official acts that never existed before. And practically speaking, that ruling gives Trump an extra gift. And this is a court that has some members who clearly appreciate gifts. It gives him those delays that he wanted. And let's be clear, this court did not try to hide the ruling's partisan, pro-Trump bias. Because when the court found that there were certain Trump allegations where Trump was immune, they said, okay, they declared that from the bench. court ruled that Trump is immune for anything he told his attorney general, even if it may allegedly advance an illegal coup. And then, for allegations that they said might go against Trump, well, they sent those back to the lower courts for a special and lengthy process. In other words, the court says if it helps Trump, lightning speed. And if it hurts Trump, well, that could take years or be thrown out entirely. This is not the jurisprudence of serious people. But on a growing list of issues, these are not serious people. These are not serious judges. This is increasingly, obviously, a MAGA court with MAGA logic, where the spectrum runs from outright grifting and lying, now challenged by new impeachment articles, to these more establishment MAGA rulings that claim to be something else, that try to legally sand off the edges of a now officially autocratic and imperial presidency on the optics, while delivering it for Trump and MAGA for maybe years to come in the legal reality. Thanks for watching The Beat Weekend, and be sure to join us weekdays at 6 p.m. Eastern for The Beat on MSNBC.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.